Silence is not always rejection. Silence, when it comes from a person who is built to run from closeness, is often the loudest scream their nervous system can make. There is a war happening inside the mind of an avoidant person right now, and you are standing right in the middle of it, without knowing the rules of engagement. You think distance means disappearance. You think coldness means they have moved on. That is the lie your anxious mind tells you, because your anxious mind cannot tolerate uncertainty. The truth is far stranger and far more dangerous than that lie. The truth is buried in childhood wounds, in nervous systems wired for threat, in a brain that confuses intimacy with danger. By the end of this video, you will understand exactly what is happening inside their skull when they go quiet, and more importantly, you will understand what you must do about it, because doing nothing is the most destructive choice you could possibly make. Consider what happens biologically when a person who fears closeness begins to feel something real for another human being. Their heart rate increases, their cortisol spikes, their amygdala, that ancient alarm system buried deep in the brain, begins firing warning signals that say, "Danger, danger, retreat, retreat." This is not a metaphor, this is measurable. Researchers studying attachment styles have documented this exact physiological response in people who carry what is called an avoidant attachment pattern. Closeness for them does not register as comfort. Closeness registers as threat. And when a human brain perceives threat, it does precisely what it was designed by millions of years of evolution to do. It runs. Picture a child raised in a home where emotional needs were met with indifference or punishment. Picture a small boy who reaches out for comfort after falling and skinning his knee, only to be told to stop crying and toughen up. Picture a small girl who cries because she is frightened, only to be left alone in a dark room until the crying stops. These children learn a brutal lesson early in life. They learn that needing another person is dangerous. They learn that vulnerability gets punished. They learn that the safest path forward is self-reliance, isolation, and emotional fortification. This is not weakness you are witnessing in the adult version of that child. This is armor. Heavy, cold, battle-tested armor, built one painful experience at a time. Armor exists for a reason. A soldier does not wear armor because he enjoys the weight of it. A soldier wears armor because somewhere, at some point, he learned that without it, he gets hurt. The avoidant person standing in front of you, growing colder by the day, retreating further into silence, is wearing armor they forged in childhood. Every time you push for closeness, every time you demand answers, every time you chase them down asking what is wrong, you are, without realizing it, confirming their deepest fear. You are proving to their nervous system that closeness leads to pressure, and pressure leads to pain. Human beings are not rational creatures pretending to be emotional. Human beings are emotional creatures pretending to be rational. This single truth explains nearly everything about romantic confusion, including the maddening behavior of someone who claims indifference while their entire physiology betrays obsession. Studies on attachment have shown something remarkable. Avoidant individuals, when separated from a partner they are pulling away from, often show heightened activation in brain regions associated with attachment and longing, even while consciously reporting that they do not miss the person. Their words say nothing. Their brain says everything. Distance, in this context, becomes a form of communication more honest than words could ever be. A person who did not care would not need distance. Indifference does not require defense mechanisms. You do not build walls around an empty field. You build walls around something valuable, something you are terrified of losing, something that, if breached, could destroy the careful order you have constructed around your own heart. The coldness you are experiencing right now may be the strongest evidence available that you matter more than this person knows how to handle. Order and chaos exist in constant tension within every human psyche. This is not poetry. This is the actual architecture of the mind. Order represents structure, predictability, control. Chaos represents the unknown, the unpredictable, the territory beyond the map. For an avoidant person, falling for someone represents a collision with chaos. Their carefully ordered emotional world, built brick by brick to prevent pain, suddenly faces an intrusion they cannot control. Love does not ask permission. Attraction does not respect boundaries drawn by childhood trauma. When chaos enters the kingdom of a heavily ordered psyche, the natural response is not celebration. The natural response is panic, followed by retreat, followed by an attempt to re-establish control through distance. Tough love requires honesty, and honesty demands that I tell you something you may not want to hear. Chasing this person will not work. Pursuing someone who is actively retreating triggers exactly the threat response that caused the retreat in the first place. This creates a vicious cycle that destroys relationships with devastating efficiency. The anxious partner pursues, the avoidant partner retreats. The anxious partner pursues harder, terrified of losing connection. The avoidant partner retreats further, terrified of losing autonomy. Neither person is acting from malice. Both people are acting from fear, dressed up in different costumes. Self-respect must become your foundation before any relationship can become healthy. A person who abandons their own dignity in pursuit of another person's approval has already lost the very thing that made them attractive in the first place. Confidence is not loud. Confidence is not arrogance. Confidence is the quiet certainty that you do not require external validation to know your own worth. This certainty cannot be faked. Human beings, especially those wired to detect threat and inauthenticity, can sense desperation from across a room. Desperation repels. Calm, grounded self-assurance attracts. Discipline separates those who build unstoppable lives from those who remain trapped in cycles of emotional chaos. Discipline means choosing your response rather than reacting from wounded instinct. When silence arrives, discipline means resisting the urge to flood their phone with messages demanding explanation. When coldness appears, discipline means examining your own behavior honestly rather than collapsing into blame or shame. Discipline is not punishment. Discipline is the architecture that allows freedom to exist without destroying itself. Suffering teaches lessons that comfort never could. Pain has a peculiar gift hidden inside its brutal exterior. Pain forces growth that comfort would never demand. The ache you feel watching someone you care about pull away carries within it an opportunity, should you choose to seize it, to examine your own patterns of attachment, your own fears, your own wounds that draw you toward people who struggle with closeness. Many people pursuing avoidant partners are themselves running from something, often an anxious attachment style rooted in their own inconsistent childhood experiences. The universe, in its strange and often cruel wisdom, frequently pairs these two wounded patterns together, creating relationships that feel simultaneously magnetic and torturous. Meaning emerges from struggle far more reliably than it emerges from ease. A person who has never faced rejection, never faced the cold shoulder of someone they desired, never lain awake wondering why the person they care about will not simply explain what is happening in their mind, has not yet been tested by life in a way that builds genuine character. This testing, however brutal it feels in the moment, carries the potential to forge something valuable within you, provided you respond to it with courage rather than collapse. Responsibility must enter this conversation now, because without responsibility, none of this analysis matters. You bear responsibility for your own healing, regardless of what the avoidant person in your life decides to do. Waiting for them to fix themselves before you begin fixing yourself is a strategy destined for failure. Their nervous system operates on its own timeline, shaped by years of conditioning that no amount of your patience, charm, or persistence can override through sheer will alone. Your task, the only task truly within your control, is to become the kind of person who does not require their consistency to feel secure. Security built from within cannot be shaken by external silence. This is the goal toward which every wounded person pursuing an avoidant partner must work. A man or woman who has done the difficult internal work of examining their own attachment wounds, who has confronted their own fear of abandonment, who has built genuine self-worth independent of romantic validation, experiences silence differently than someone still searching for external proof of their own value. The silence still hurts. Pain does not disappear simply because you have grown wiser. The silence, however, no longer controls you. It no longer dictates your mood, your self-esteem, your sense of whether you are worthy of love. Patterns repeat themselves with terrifying consistency until someone finally has the courage to interrupt them. Look honestly at your romantic history. Notice if you find yourself repeatedly drawn toward people who struggle with emotional availability. This is not coincidence. This is your nervous system seeking out the familiar, even when the familiar caused you pain in childhood. A person raised by an emotionally distant parent often grows into an adult who unconsciously recreates that exact dynamic in romantic relationships, chasing the elusive love of someone unavailable in a desperate, unconscious attempt to finally win the approval that was withheld decades earlier. This pattern will continue indefinitely unless you bring it into conscious awareness and deliberately choose a different path. Confrontation with your own shadow becomes necessary if you wish to break free from this cycle. The shadow, in psychological terms, represents everything about yourself that you refuse to acknowledge, everything you have buried beneath layers of denial because facing it felt too dangerous. Perhaps your shadow contains a desperate need to be needed, a fear that without someone depending on your pursuit, you yourself have no value. Perhaps your shadow contains a belief, planted long ago, that love must be earned through suffering, through chasing, through proving your worth again and again to someone who refuses to simply offer affection freely. Until you drag these buried beliefs into the light of conscious examination, they will continue steering your romantic choices from the shadows, invisible yet powerful. Action must follow understanding, or understanding becomes nothing more than intellectual entertainment. Knowing why the avoidant person in your life goes cold does not by itself change your circumstances. You must act on this knowledge. Begin by establishing boundaries that protect your own emotional well-being rather than boundaries designed to manipulate their behavior. Tell yourself clearly that you will not chase someone who has gone silent for days without explanation. Tell yourself that texting them repeatedly, checking their social media obsessively, or asking mutual friends for updates on their feelings will not produce the outcome you desire. These behaviors, however natural they feel when anxiety floods your system, only confirm to the avoidant nervous system that closeness equals pressure. Standing firm in your own values requires more courage than most people realize until they attempt it themselves. It is far easier to send one more message, make one more attempt at explanation, offer one more piece of reassurance, than it is to sit quietly with the discomfort of not knowing. Tolerating uncertainty is one of the great psychological challenges of human existence, and those who master this tolerance gain a freedom that those who cannot master it will never experience. The person constantly seeking certainty in matters of the heart becomes a slave to whoever holds the power to provide or withhold that certainty. Power dynamics shift the moment you stop chasing and start standing. This is not manipulation. This is not a game designed to trick someone into loving you. This is simply the natural consequence of psychological reality. When you chase, you communicate scarcity. When you stand firmly rooted in your own worth, unmoved by silence, you communicate abundance. Human beings, across cultures and across history, find abundance attractive and scarcity repellent. This is not romantic theory. This is observable pattern repeated endlessly across human relationships throughout recorded history. Vulnerability, paradoxically, becomes a form of strength when wielded correctly. I am not suggesting you become cold or manipulative in response to their coldness. That path leads only to two people locked in mutual avoidance, both protecting themselves so thoroughly that genuine connection becomes impossible. Instead, learn to express your needs honestly and directly, without desperation, without pleading. Say what you need clearly, once, and then allow the other person space to respond authentically rather than under pressure. A statement made from strength sounds different than a plea made from fear, even when the words themselves are nearly identical. Growth demands that you examine your own contribution to relationship dynamics rather than placing all responsibility on the avoidant partner. Perhaps you have, without realizing it, communicated through your own anxious behavior that you require constant reassurance to feel secure. Perhaps your need for frequent contact, frequent validation, frequent proof of affection has unintentionally triggered the very avoidance you now find so painful. This is not victim blaming. This is honest psychological assessment, the kind of assessment necessary if you genuinely wish to build healthier relationships moving forward rather than repeating the same painful pattern with a different person wearing a different face. Maturity in love looks remarkably unglamorous most days. It looks like sitting with discomfort instead of immediately seeking relief through someone else's attention. It looks like building your own life so thoroughly, so meaningfully, that another person's temporary silence cannot collapse your entire emotional structure. It looks like pursuing your career, your friendships, your physical health, your creative projects with such dedication that you become, almost as a side effect, far less available for anxious obsession over someone who has not texted back. The richest irony of romantic psychology states clearly that the people who chase the least often become the people pursued the most. Trust must be rebuilt slowly with someone carrying an avoidant attachment style, brick by patient brick, never through force or pressure. Avoidant individuals are not broken beyond repair. Their nervous systems, shaped by early experience, can absolutely learn new patterns when given consistent, calm, non-demanding presence over extended periods of time. This requires patience that borders on heroic. It requires you to offer steady affection without flooding them with intensity that triggers their threat response. It requires celebrating small moments of openness without immediately demanding more, which only sends them retreating further into their protective shell. Honesty about your own limits matters as much as patience for someone else's healing journey. There exists a critical difference between giving someone space to work through their attachment wounds and tolerating treatment that genuinely disrespects your own dignity. Understanding why someone behaves coldly does not obligate you to accept indefinite mistreatment. Compassion for their psychological wounds must coexist alongside firm boundaries, protecting your own emotional health. A person who uses their attachment trauma as a permanent excuse to avoid all accountability, all communication, all effort toward growth is not someone working on healing. They are someone hiding behind psychology as justification for continued avoidance. Courage separates those who transform pain into purpose from those who remain forever trapped, reliving the same wound. Every great story across human history involves a hero who must leave the comfortable world behind and venture into unknown territory, facing dragons that represent the unprocessed fears lurking within their own psyche. Your current situation, painful as it feels, represents exactly this kind of call to adventure. The avoidant person standing before you, wrapped in silence and cold distance, has become an unexpected catalyst, forcing you to confront your own deepest fears about worthiness, about abandonment, about whether you can survive uncertainty without collapsing into desperation. Sacrifice lies at the very center of any meaningful transformation a human being can undergo. To become someone capable of healthy love, you must sacrifice the part of yourself that believes chasing equals devotion. You must sacrifice the comforting lie that says, if you only try harder, message more frequently, explain yourself more clearly, the other person will finally open up completely. This sacrifice feels like death because, in a psychological sense, it actually is death. It is the death of an old identity built around anxious pursuit, replaced by a new identity built around grounded self-possession. Nothing valuable in life arrives without this kind of painful exchange. Identity itself becomes the true battlefield in situations like the one you currently face. Who are you when someone does not respond the way you hoped? Who are you when silence stretches across days that feel like years? If your entire sense of self crumbles the moment another person withdraws their attention, this reveals something far more significant than mere romantic disappointment. This reveals that your identity has been constructed on unstable ground, dependent on external validation rather than internal conviction. Repairing this foundation matters infinitely more than repairing the relationship causing you current distress. Fathers and mothers shape the architecture of attachment long before a child ever experiences romantic love. A father who remains emotionally absent, physically present yet psychologically distant, teaches his son or daughter a devastating lesson about what masculine love looks like. A mother who withholds affection unless specific conditions are met teaches her children that love must be earned through performance rather than offered freely through presence. These early lessons become the invisible architecture governing adult romantic choices decades later, often operating completely outside conscious awareness, until someone finally does the difficult work of excavating these buried foundations. Excavation of this kind requires more bravery than most people realize when they first begin therapy or serious self-examination. Digging into childhood wounds feels, initially, like opening old injuries that had finally stopped bleeding. The temptation to leave these wounds buried, to simply medicate the pain through distraction, through endless scrolling, through chasing one avoidant partner after another in an unconscious repetition compulsion, remains powerful and constant. Genuine healing demands you resist this temptation and instead walk directly into the wound, examining it with unflinching honesty until its power over your present behavior finally diminishes. Logos represents an ancient concept describing the principle of order, truth, and meaningful speech that brings structure out of chaos. When you speak truthfully about your own needs, your own fears, your own patterns, you participate in this ancient principle. When you lie to yourself about why you keep pursuing people incapable of meeting your needs, you abandon truth in favor of comfortable delusion. Comfortable delusion always exacts a price eventually, usually a price far steeper than the temporary discomfort honest self-examination would have required. Speak truth to yourself first, before demanding it from anyone else. Hierarchy exists within every healthy psyche, a ranking of values that determines which needs take priority when conflicts arise. A person without clear internal hierarchy becomes consumed by whoever shouts loudest in their emotional landscape, often meaning whoever withholds affection most successfully captures the most attention. Building genuine internal hierarchy means deciding, consciously and deliberately, that your own dignity ranks above the temporary relief that comes from receiving a single text message after days of painful silence. This decision, repeated daily through small disciplined choices, eventually becomes character. Character cannot be talked into existence through positive affirmations or wishful thinking. Character emerges through repeated action taken in moments when the easier path beckons seductively. Every single time you choose not to send that desperate text message, you strengthen a psychological muscle that determines your capacity for self-respect in future relationships. Every single time you choose to focus on your own goals rather than monitoring someone else's online activity, you build evidence, stored deep within your own nervous system, that you are capable of tolerating discomfort without collapsing. Discomfort tolerance ranks among the most underrated psychological skills a human being can develop. Modern culture promises constant comfort, instant gratification, immediate resolution of any uncomfortable feeling through distraction or consumption. This promise creates fragile people, incapable of sitting with uncertainty long enough to allow genuine resolution to emerge naturally. The avoidant person in your life needs time, sometimes considerable time, to process their own internal conflict about closeness. Your capacity to tolerate this waiting period without sabotaging it through anxious pursuit often determines whether genuine connection eventually becomes possible. Possibility remains alive only as long as you do not destroy it through premature demands for certainty. Many relationships that could have eventually flourished into something genuinely meaningful collapsed prematurely because one partner could not tolerate the natural uncertainty present during early stages of emotional bonding, particularly with someone carrying avoidant tendencies. Premature ultimatums, delivered from a place of anxiety rather than genuine conviction, frequently destroy exactly what they were intended to protect. Patience, real patience grounded in self-respect rather than desperation, preserves possibility far more effectively than pressure ever could. Pressure applied to a frightened animal produces exactly one predictable outcome, and that outcome is flight. Human nervous systems, despite our sophisticated language and complex civilization, remain governed by the same basic threat response mechanisms present in every other mammal on this planet. An avoidant person experiencing pressure to open up, explain their feelings, or commit to greater closeness will, in the vast majority of cases, retreat further rather than move toward the connection being demanded of them. Understanding this basic biological reality should fundamentally reshape how you approach the entire situation you currently find yourself navigating. Navigation through difficult emotional terrain requires a map most people were never given during childhood. Perhaps you were never taught healthy strategies for managing romantic uncertainty because the adults raising you never possessed these strategies themselves. This is not an excuse for remaining stuck in destructive patterns indefinitely. This is simply an acknowledgement that you are likely starting this particular journey without inherited wisdom, meaning you must build new neural pathways through conscious, deliberate practice, rather than relying on instinct alone, since your instincts were shaped by an imperfect environment. Imperfection characterizes every human being who has ever lived, including both you and the avoidant person currently occupying so much space in your thoughts. Neither of you arrived in this situation as a villain and a victim locked in a simple morality tale. Both of you arrived carrying wounds, carrying conditioning, carrying patterns established long before either of you met each other. Holding this complexity in mind, rather than collapsing into simplistic narratives where one person is entirely at fault, allows for far more productive analysis of what genuine healing might actually require. Genuine healing rarely follows a straight, predictable path from pain toward peace. Expect setbacks. Expect moments where old patterns resurface despite your best intentions, where the temptation to chase, to demand answers, to seek reassurance through repeated contact feels overwhelming and nearly impossible to resist. These moments do not represent failure. These moments represent the natural texture of genuine transformation, which never proceeds in a perfectly clean upward trajectory, but instead moves forward through cycles of progress, regression, and renewed commitment to growth. Renewed commitment matters more than perfect consistency when building any lasting psychological change. You will fail at maintaining boundaries occasionally. You will send a message you later regret, check social media you promised yourself you would avoid, feel desperate hope flare up at the smallest crumb of attention offered after extended silence. This is normal. This is human. What separates those who eventually achieve genuine transformation from those who remain permanently trapped is not the absence of these failures, but rather the speed and grace with which they return to their committed path after each stumble. Stumbling teaches lessons standing perfectly upright never could. Each time you notice yourself falling back into anxious pursuit, you gain valuable information about your own triggers, your own remaining wounds, your own areas still requiring deeper healing work. Treat these moments as data rather than evidence of permanent failure. A scientist conducting an experiment does not abandon their research the first time results contradict their hypothesis. A scientist adjusts their approach based on new information and continues forward with refined understanding. Apply this same scientific curiosity to your own psychological development rather than harsh self-condemnation. Condemnation, particularly self-directed condemnation, accomplishes absolutely nothing productive in the realm of psychological growth. Shame tells you that you are fundamentally broken, fundamentally unworthy, fundamentally destined to repeat painful patterns forever. Shame lies. Guilt, properly understood, says that a specific action caused harm and invites correction. Shame, by contrast, says that your entire being is defective beyond repair. Replace shame-based self-talk with guilt-based accountability whenever you notice yourself slipping into old patterns, because guilt motivates change, while shame only produces paralysis and further hiding. Hiding from your own emotional needs never produces the strength it pretends to offer. Some people, having read about attachment theory and avoidant behavior, swing toward the opposite extreme, suppressing all vulnerability in an attempt to appear unbothered, unaffected, completely independent of any need for connection. This represents merely another defensive strategy, another form of armor, rather than genuine psychological health. True strength does not mean pretending you feel nothing when someone you care about goes cold. True strength means feeling the full weight of that pain while still choosing wise, deliberate action rather than reactive desperation. Wisdom emerges precisely at the intersection where deep feeling meets disciplined action. You are allowed to feel hurt by silence. You are allowed to feel confused by mixed signals, by warmth followed unpredictably by withdrawal, by intimacy followed by sudden distance. Denying these feelings does not make you stronger. Denying these feelings simply pushes them underground, where they will eventually resurface in less controlled, less conscious ways. Acknowledge what you feel honestly, then choose your response from a place of conscious decision rather than unconscious reaction.